I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. As always, I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala. And Elizabeth, today we're discussing a story that is really stranger than fiction, unfortunately, in quite a few different ways. Tell me about the crime behind this ongoing murder trial.
Great to be back, Chance. Today I'm going to talk about a trial that began late last week. It is the murder trial of Andira Abdelaziz. She is a woman of Palestinian descent, and the reason I point that out is because this case has a little bit of information in it that may not be recognizable for people who don't understand the culture. So she is accused of stabbing her nephew, who bled to death in the driveway of her Far West Side home in 2016. They were related by marriage, and they had an ongoing sexual relationship that lasted for years until his death on August 9th, 2016. The victim in this case is a man named Mohammed Abdelaziz. He was 25 years old. He was recently graduated from law school and had aspirations to become an attorney. And something happened this August day on the far west side of San Antonio when he was stabbed in the back and he ran from the home to his car. And then once in his car, he accelerated and ended up crashing into the house. Indira, and I'm going to use first names because they both have the same last name, was arrested by Bexar County Sheriff's deputies and charged with murder. What came out in court last week was that they had been having an ongoing relationship that no one in the family knew about. And as you can imagine, this it appears to have split the family. And just to tell you a little bit about what was discussed in court, in his opening statements, Bexar County Assistant District Attorney and Prosecutor Clayton Hayden told the court that they were having a relationship that had gone on for several years, but that the family didn't know about it. And he said there are allegations of domestic abuse involving the two people, and there were several text messages that were sent by the victim, Mohammed Abdelaziz, and the only thing that did not appear to come up in Andina's report to the police was that she was being beaten. So they asked the jury to find her guilty of murder. In his opening statement, defense attorney Mike McCrum told the jury that this relationship was secret, but that they had this relationship, one that the defendant had never experienced before. He kind of painted a story of falling in love, if you will, because we learned that day that Andira was married at 14 to her husband, Kareem, as part of an arranged marriage that is traditional in the Palestinian culture. She was born in the United States, and at 14, she went to Palestine, Jerusalem, and was married and came back to the United States. It appears that the family has been in San Antonio for a very long time, and they have 4 children, Andira and her husband. But At some point, she began a relationship with her husband's nephew when, according to opening statements, her husband asked Mohammed to come stay with the family because he was going to be going to Jerusalem to visit family for a while. So at some point when they were together, a relationship sparked. So what came out in the first day of trial was that there were some text messages that were sent. The defense is alleging that Mohammed had a prescription drug addiction and was a violent man. He had been married while he was going to law school in Kansas and had a history of domestic violence there with his wife. At some point, he did come and live in the home with Andira and her husband and their children. So the day that Bexar County Sheriff's deputies responded to the home before the attack took place, the defendant was alleging that the victim was kind of casing the joint, was looking in the windows. She had received about 100 text messages from the day before and the day of the incident that appeared to be threatening, and she was afraid. So she called sheriff's deputies, and when they responded and talked to Mohammed, he showed them a driver's license that had the same address as the home. And Indira said to investigators and to deputies that day that she was mistaken, that she had not called, but when they went to their vehicles to double check with 911, they realized that she was the one who called. So she told them in the presence of Mohammed that it was a mistake, but she never reported that there was anything that had gone wrong. So at some point when he went inside the house, they got into some sort of altercation, and Mohammed was stabbed in the back. So on Friday morning during court, the interview with police was played, and it was very interesting because only the jury was allowed to see the actual videotaped interview, but you could hear, sitting in the gallery, you could hear what was going on. And she was explaining to authorities that the family did not know that they were engaged in a relationship. So she was very upset. You could hear her crying and a shaky voice and saying to the investigating officer that she felt threatened. She was living in terror because she would do things for the victim. He would bring his clothes over and he would have her wash them, or if he was hungry, he would go to the house and demand that she make food for him. And if he didn't like what she did for him, he would do things such as, pour Coca-Cola or soda all over his clean clothes, or not want to have one of the things that I heard was that they only had chicken fajitas left over from dinner, and he wanted beef, so when she made him a plate, he threw it all over the kitchen. So those were some of the things that came out in court on Friday. This trial began on Thursday. And so naturally, as the state presents their case, you're hearing that side first. But what is interesting about this is that the defense is saying that there is a domestic violence situation going on here. Not really different from any other cases that have been publicized, maybe, but the fact that you have a situation that was explained in court where there is an arranged marriage from 14 years old, that and in a culture that really is not one that very many people here understand, made it very interesting. They lived in a really, really nice side of town, and as I said earlier, the victim in this case was wanting to be actually a human rights attorney. So it's not the usual case that anyone sees in Bexar County.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. As technology has advanced, digital communication evidence has really moved into the courtroom. And so now you have things like text messages or emails like the ones discussed in this case that are brought up in trial. And I'm wondering, how are they given to the jury? Do they just hear them read, or do they receive things like transcripts? And I'm sure that might also have to do with just how many texts or emails are brought up during the trial itself.
So yes, as technology has changed with digital communication, one of the things that you see happening in court that they're going to be bringing out more and more in this case is the fact that there were text message exchanges. One of the things that the detective asked Andira in her interview when she was talking about the text messages that had been sent to her was whether or not she had saved them. And she had said that she would delete them as they would arrive, obviously because she was not supposed to be in that sort of relationship. But she did say that the day before this incident happened, there appeared to have been a lot of text messages. They said there were at least 100 that had been sent to her from the victim because he had been upset. Now, we have yet to really find out what exactly he was upset about. But, it's like the internet. Once you send something out, you just really can't get rid of it. If this goes like other cases have gone, there will be photographs or presentations in the courtroom where the jurors are going to be able to see the exchange between the two. And if there are any voicemail messages, they would probably hear those as well.
Elizabeth, I know the victim in this case has been described as someone who had a lot of life ahead of him and even wanted to be a human rights lawyer. So tell me more about the victim.
As I said, he was recently graduated from law school in Kansas. One of my colleagues at the time that this incident occurred, one of my colleagues, Rai Drusen, wrote a rather lengthy story about Mohammed Abdelaziz, who Rai described as a Palestinian American who lived in two worlds, his family's hometown on the West Bank and on the Alamo City's far west side. And he attended the American School of Palestine in Ramallah as a child. And then he came to San Antonio when he was about 16 and helped his family in restaurants and at meat markets that they owned on the west side. And so incidentally, one of the reasons why I haven't really said very much about the husband in this case is because as a restaurant owner, he was working all the time. He would be gone from about 6 in the morning until about 10 o'clock at night. So here you have this. This was a family that they had restaurants and meat markets on the West Side, and the victim worked at these places while earning a political science degree at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And he received his law degree from Washburn University in Kansas about a year before he died. So, all of these cases where, obviously when someone has died, especially in a very violent way, it's always a bad thing. But what makes this case all the more tragic is because of the family that's involved. And this is a very, very large family. They were showing photographs of relatives in court that had pictures of Muhammad's graduation, of other family gatherings, and it's a very, very large family. So in just observing in the courtroom, you can see that there are family members who sit on both sides, and I've seen some of this in the past where you have family members where they may not. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking a side by sitting on a certain side, but there are two sides in court, for a reason, and it just appears to be very tragic. There are people sitting outside of the courtroom, even possibly because they're going to be called as witnesses that are, visibly upset. It makes you, wonder. There's not going to really be. There's never any winners in a case like this because someone has died. But when you add the added component of the fact that this person died allegedly at the hands of his aunt at her home in an upscale neighborhood, it just kind of brings it all, to just a very tragic conclusion.
And before we go, Elizabeth, any final thoughts on how this case has played out so far? And of course, what are your thoughts for the future of this trial?
Something that we will likely see as the trial continues this week is more testimony from relatives. This is being heard in the 226 State District Court presided by Judge Sid Harrell. And like I said, it should be interesting to see, what is going to happen as far as relatives who come in to testify, because this was something that it was basically a secret that was between these two people, and even one actually that was never divulged at the time when the news came out and we reported on the issues. So it'll be interesting to see, and also to find out more of the family dynamic, because looking at the photographs, this was a very, very close family, and photographs of the neighborhood where they lived, the really nice big house, and these things happen. A lot. People get into arguments or altercations, sometimes violently, but you hardly ever see a situation where you have something like this where it has the potential to split a family. Okay, I just wanted to update you, Chance, and our listeners on yet another installation of a trial that has come back around another time. This is the case of Daniel Moreno Lopez. Around midday Friday, both sides rested in his retrial. Again, this is just a horrific case that happened involving a drug deal that went bad. And it had kidnapping, it had murder, allegations of, murder. The victim was dismembered, his arms and legs were cut off, and he was burned on a barbecue pit. This case has come back around because when it initially started, they ended in a mistrial because of allegations of discovery issues. The defense had said that they were not informed that one of the witnesses and co-defendants in the case who got on the stand and basically detailed how the entire crime occurred and admitted that she orchestrated it and severed the limbs of her first cousin, and this would be Candy Dominguez. She spilled everything on the witness stand the first time, but then told the court that she had been diagnosed as schizophrenic and bipolar, which basically threw everything. And Daniel Lopez is now in a retrial. So after hearing all of the evidence in a retrial that lasted several days, we still did not hear Candy Dominguez testify, and the other co-defendant, who is the cousin of Daniel Lopez, Gabriel Moreno, his trial was completed about 2 months ago, but after 4 days of deliberations, the jury was not able to reach a verdict. We were thinking that maybe we would see Candy Dominguez again, but she did not come and testify for Daniel, her boyfriend. So we will find out this week, tomorrow actually, when the state and the defense will present their closing arguments in the case, and the jury will get to decide whether or not Lopez is guilty of murder.
Elizabeth Zavala, as always, thank you for joining me for today's episode of The Docket.
Thanks. Have a great week.
And thanks again to San Antonio Express News court reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chan Storland.